All we heard was that Trump believes he has accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplish in 4 years. He's only been in power for 5 weeks, and during that time he's managed to piss off the whole of Europe, to call Zelensky a dictator, to sidle up to Putin, to cancel huge numbers of programmes that were actually helping ordinary Americans, including veterans.
Justin Trudeau said, "Donald, this is dumb, what you are doing." But Donald Trump still seems to be believing that this is the best way for him to assert America first, to slap tariffs on his allies of Mexico and Canada.
Before you watch today's episode, we want to remind you that tickets are on sale for the newsagent's live shows with HSBC UK. We're kicking off our tour at Birmingham Symphony Hall on February the 17th. Then we're off to the Bridgewater Hall in Manchester, that's on February the 24th, and finally to Usher Hall in Edinburgh on March the 11th. Head over to Global Player to get your tickets for any of those dates. The link will be in the description below. We're really excited to see you there.
$40 million to improve the social and economic inclusion of sedentary migrants. Nobody knows what that is. $8 million to promote LGBTQI+ in the African nation of Lesotho, which nobody has ever heard of. $60 million for indigenous peoples and Afro-Colombian empowerment in Central America. $60 million. $8 million for making mice transgender.
Transgender mice, or Sesame Street in Arabic, or money to Lesotho. Don't look at any of those claims too closely because they were done for effect. Trump was giving what many have seen as a State of the Union address to both houses in Congress, and it was essentially a run-through of his greatest hits so far, in which he said, essentially, that he's the best president America has ever had.
If MAGA had to go through a doping test now, it would fail, because it is running on steroids in a major way. And Trump last night was saying, "I've won, I'm defiant, I'm victorious, and on we go." Welcome to the Newsagents USA.
The Newsagents USA.
It's John.
It's Emily.
And a little bit later, we're going to be talking to the man who, if the election result had been different in November, would now be the US Secretary of State. He was Kamala Harris's right-hand person and tipped to get the top job had she won. And the question we'll be asking is, what on earth do the Democrats do now?
If anyone was watching last night expecting to see the Trump thesis on America's foreign policy, his position on NATO, his understanding of where the Ukraine war was going now, they got none of it. All we heard was that Trump believes he has accomplished more in 43 days than most administrations accomplish in 4 years. And he went on to say that Joe Biden was, I think, the worst president that America's ever had. It was his greatest hits. He's only been in power for 5 weeks, and during that time he's managed to piss off the whole of Europe, to call Zelensky a dictator, to sidle up to Putin, to cancel huge numbers of programmes that were actually helping ordinary Americans, including veterans. And at one point, when he tried to claim that he had not just won the popular vote by a large number, but also had a mandate for everything he was doing, we saw one former veteran, a Democrat, Al Green from Texas, get to his feet and shout out, "You had no mandate to end Medicaid." In other words, the security that goes to many veterans. This is what happened next.
Mr. Green, take your seat. Take your seat, sir. Take your seat. Finding that members continue to engage in willful and concerted disruption of proper decorum, the chair now directs the Sergeant-at-Arms to restore order. Remove this gentleman from the chamber.
Yeah, so he was duly evicted, and there were a number of other Democrats who kind of protested in a sort of rather half-hearted sort of way. And I thought actually pretty petty, and it was kind of, it just looked like student union politics. They didn't really have a concerted voice. I think that Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader in the House, had called for Democrats to remain in dignified silence. It was sort of undignified squabbling that came from them last night. I mean, Trump did say a bit on Ukraine, but you'd have to have been watching for about 55 minutes before you got to that. And there it was just an indication, yeah, I've had a good letter from Zelensky, maybe we can do something. And I think there are things that are moving, and I think wheels are turning there. But you'd think that, you know, Trump was focused on domestic policy. And as you say, trying to say how fantastic everything is, except for the small matter of the tariffs that have just come in. And there was just the slightest acknowledgement that Americans might find it bumpy as a result.
Are about making America rich again and making America great again, and it's happening, and it will happen rather quickly. There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much. No, you're not. Oh.
Yeah, a little disturbance could mean a recession. I mean, he is actually doing something quite unusual there. He's forewarning that things could get worse, he says, before they'll get better. His poll numbers have fallen quite substantially on this one issue of the economy, which is the foremost issue for most Americans. And since he's been in power, we've seen him lose around 10 points in terms of his popularity, because the very thing that he promised on the campaign trail all the way through was that he was going to make America rich again and better again and profitable again. And most Americans are actually seeing, I mean, they've been listening and they're watching, they're seeing what the stock market's doing when tariffs come in, and they're listening to how people are responding to what is going to be the impact on their goods when tariffs are imposed, because goods will rise. And actually that is not going to go down very well.
No, rather tragically, last night, while he was staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning watching this, I looked up Trump's first State of the Union speech from when he first became president. And there he was on a victory lap of how much more the stock market was worth now that he had become the president of the United States, and that stocks were soaring.
Yeah.
Stocks have gone down and are below where they were when he won the election. It is hard to blame Joe Biden for that. And the biggest, most precipitous, vertiginous falls, when have they come? In the past 48 hours, because of his moves over tariffs. This is self-inflicted, and as kind of Justin Trudeau said yesterday, Donald, this is dumb, what you are doing. But Donald Trump still seems to be believing that this is the best way for him to assert America first, to slap tariffs on his allies of Mexico and Canada.
Yeah, and to give you a sense of what that speech felt like, sort of looking on live, it was a curious combination, wasn't it, of a campaign rally and something very formal. So he had behind him Speaker Mike Johnson, his Vice President J.D. Vance. He had the Democrats on one side. He had the Republicans on the other. He'd put in special guests, including the woman who he said was a victim of transgender sports inequality. He'd pulled in all the people that he wanted the cameras to focus on. And I guess the thing that we always forget with Trump is his ability to make people laugh. And that was really uncomfortable for the Democrats because, you know, when he's talking about not knowing where Lesotho is, you know, it's crass and it's a bit pathetic, but he does know that it's a country, and he does think it's a funny line to play because it makes him sound sort of, you know, ha-ha racist and funny and powerful. And he did at one stage tell the Democrats that if they didn't get on board with his tax cuts, then they would never get back into power again.
And once again, I look at the Democrats in front of me, and I realize there is absolutely nothing I can say to make them happy or to make them stand or smile or applaud. Nothing I can do. I could find a cure to the most devastating disease, a disease that would wipe out entire nations, or announce the answers to the greatest economy in history, or the stoppage of crime to the lowest levels ever recorded. And these people sitting right here will not clap, will not stand, and certainly will not cheer for these astronomical achievements. They won't do it, no matter what. Five times I've been on.
And that's kind of true, which is why it's so uncomfortable for the Democrats. They don't really want him to succeed, because then that's everyone's worst nightmare come true.
Well, joining us now is Dr. Phil Gordon, who, if the election had turned out differently in November, might well now be the Secretary of State for the United States of America. He was Kamala Harris's national security advisor, an absolute linchpin figure with her during the campaign, and has worked for Bill Clinton, has worked for Barack Obama, has worked for Joe Biden. And Phil, it's great to see you again, and thank you very much for doing this. I mean, did you stay up? Were you watching the speech last night? What did you make of it?
I did watch the speech. Sometimes seeing these things is different from reading them to get a flavor for it. I forced myself to watch it because honestly, it's painful to see what is going on in this country and where the president is taking it. But I was also kind of unimpressed. I mean, there was nothing new. It was sort of a campaign rally that we've seen multiple times, full of the same themes. He spent a lot of time, obviously, on immigration, exaggerating the situation when he came in. He spent a lot of time on the trans issue. It was a repeat of the radical agenda. What struck me most, though, was honestly the backdrop of real questions about the U.S. economy. He didn't talk a lot about inflation, because that's what in the campaign it was inflation, Biden inflation, blaming the Democrats. And the truth is now, he gave the speech a day after his big tariffs on our close allies, which are going to drive inflation. The stock market's lower than it was when he came in. So I think that was a little bit difficult for him. He tried to paint this as the launch of America's golden era, but it doesn't feel like that back here.
He did use that curious phrase at one point, Phil, where he talked about disturbance. And it seemed to be hinting at a knowledge that there was going to be fallout from his tariffs, and there was going to be fallout from rising inflation, and that would hurt normal Americans. Were you surprised to see him even go there?
A little bit, because that's not his thing, right? Normally it's everything is great, everything, greater than it's ever been before, not acknowledging any problem. But I think that is a sign that, like, he sees what's happening. He's got to be a little bit nervous about it and thinking about how to handle it and what he's going to say when more and more Americans start to see that egg prices are still high, gas prices are still high, the Chinese are responding against our farmers and they're not able to sell their stuff. So it seemed to be the tiniest un-Trumpian acknowledgement of something like that. So he has something to point to. A little bit, out of character.
We'll come to the sort of Democrat opposition in a little bit to Donald Trump and where the Democratic Party is right now. But do you sense there is any opposition from within the Republican Party that is ever going to make its voice heard? Because it looks at the moment that Donald Trump can say whatever he likes and he'll face no opposition for it.
No, John, you're on to the real thing. Look, a State of the Union is always partisan, and everybody on the president's side stands up and applaud, and the other side folds their arms. So I don't want to overstate the degree to which that came across last night, but you couldn't help but be struck by the absolute loyalty of the Republicans in the room, even for things that we know they never stood for before. They're probably nervous about now, but they couldn't do anything other than laugh at his jokes, give standing ovations to everything he said. Honestly, we're at the point now where those you're referring to who might have had reservations are gone. They've been purged. I mean, that is the theme of this administration so far, is absolute loyalty to the leader. And if not, you get primaried or they turn against you. So we're already to the point where most of them are already out. And so it was genuine. But no, John, he has absolute control of his party. People don't dare stand up to him. That's the story of the cabinet. He knew better this time. Last time, wasn't sure how to play it. Half of the cabinet members were the so-called adults in the room. They didn't really agree with him. They didn't go on with his agenda. You had all sorts of, civil servants, professionals in the government who he believed stood in his way and were not 100% loyal. The message he sent by appointing, Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard and RFK Jr. And what they've been doing so far, and Elon Musk, who's purging a lot of these professionals as well, is if you're not absolutely loyal, get out of the way. They're asking professionals, career nonpartisan professionals, political questions, about who won the last election and what happened on January 6th, to make sure that if you don't give the right answer, you'll either won't be promoted or you're on the way out.
I mean, genuinely, how far can that go, Phil? Because you heard Trump yesterday talking about taking Greenland with the Speaker, Mike Johnson, just behind him and his vice president on the other side. And in any normal administration, they would have wheeled him straight out to a loony bin, right? And so I'm kind of, it feels like, I mean, we know there are no breaks, but at what point do you actually say this cannot sustain? There will be a breaking point.
I don't know. I don't think anyone knows the answer to that question. And it's really troubling because you can't see it. There was that Jonathan Swan interview with Mitch McConnell a couple of years ago now, where he said, after one of the, Trump crazy things to this traditional conservative senior leader in the Senate, like, is there no limit? Like, what is your red line? Okay, you're going along with things we know you don't support, but where is the limit? And Mitch McConnell was absolutely silent, because there seems to be no limit.
But he did find his own backbone.
Emily,
I mean, interestingly, Mitch McConnell is one of those few who sort of belatedly did find his spine, right?
Well, but that's the exception that proves the rule. He found his spine, by not voting for RFK Jr. because he once had polio and that was a red line for him, while voting for Kash Patel and Tulsi Gabbard. Yeah. So no, so if the point is, if you're in your mid-80s and you're tiring and you're not running again and you're a major national figure, you can find some tiny thing to disagree with the president on when it affects you personally. That's like if that's the answer, then that's not terribly encouraging. Just think about it this way, like, what is the red line? One might have thought that supporting a violent coup to overthrow an election kind of would have been a red line, but it wasn't. They came back to support him anyway. He ended up pardoning all of the January 6th protesters, including the violent ones. At least half of the Republicans in the room had said, okay, he might do some pardons. We understand that, but obviously not the violent ones. And included in that group was a guy called J.D. Vance, who was on TV, right before they took office, saying, yes, some of them were treated badly. He'll pardon some, but not the violent ones, because killing police is not something the Republican Party stands for. Well, that's gone now, and they totally support that. So honestly, if I had to tell you what, the red line is, I don't know.
Well, Phil, let's explore that a little bit. Pulling out of NATO. Is that a red line for Republican senators?
He pulls out of NATO, and 98% of senators and House Republicans would support him. I mean, we've just seen that on issue after issue. Don't kid yourself. I mean, that, to me, that's not even close to a red line. If violent overthrow and storming the Capitol isn't a red line, pulling out of NATO. And you see, the fascinating thing is just how quickly they go along with whatever he's for. I mean, something like Ukraine, there were a lot of hardline anti-Russian Republicans, including, by the way, someone called Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, who Trump decided the war needs to end because Ukraine needs to give in and embrace Russia's narrative. Well, they're on board for that.
I mean, he can't be having an easy time at the moment, Marco Rubio. I mean, would your bet be that he stays in the cabinet, or that he, I don't know. I mean, he didn't look very comfortable on that Oval Office sofa.
He did not look very comfortable on the sofa. No, my bet would be that he goes. I actually tweeted that the other day after Marco Rubio was one of the most articulate proponents of foreign assistance, just making the case in the Republican Party. This is in our national security interest. It helps contain China. It helps keep diseases out of our country. It's a tiny fraction of our budget. And he was very powerful on that, articulate, smart. And now suddenly he's the guy responsible for canceling 95% of USAID programs and defending Trump. He was the most articulate proponents of standing up for Ukraine and principles and honor and decency and standing up to the Russians. And now, like he says, Ukraine needs to entirely give to the Russians. So that's what I posted the other day, that when Trump inevitably gets rid of him, it'll be interesting to see how he explains. To me, he is, he's serving a purpose for Trump because he's articulate and people know where he comes from. He's useful for Trump to have out there, but I don't see how he can last, and it must be awfully painful for him to watch this.
Phil, you know what the European reaction is to what is happening in your country at the moment. You know the deep unease, and you've worked so closely with European leaders for many years. Should we be looking to the fact that America is probably going to withdraw from NATO, or somehow the kind of Article 5 doesn't matter anymore, or the Western security umbrella is not what it was? I mean, I don't quite know where to define it, But the fact of the matter is that America is not with Europe right now.
Look, John, I mean, I hate to say that. I've spent my entire career working closely with Europeans, sharing the view that we are stronger together, having absolute confidence in NATO and Article 5 and our interests in European security. But can I honestly sit here and tell you today that Europeans have nothing to worry about on that score? I mean, given what we've seen, no. And it doesn't even have to be formal withdrawal of NATO, right? Which, Congress, by the way, passed legislation. This will be an interesting test of Emily's question of how far they'll come. Congress passed legislation that would require Congress to agree to pull out of NATO. But you think if Trump decides to pull out, they wouldn't just slavishly go along, given everything that we've seen? But my point is, even if they don't, NATO obviously is a treaty and a legal guarantee in Article 5. But more than anything, NATO is the belief in the minds of our allies and a potential adversary that the United States would go to war to defend a NATO ally, right? It doesn't matter what the treaty says. Putin, for example, would have to believe that if he invades Latvia, the United States would consider that a treaty violation and respond. Does one think that, given everything Donald Trump has said and done, that he would be on board for that? And if he's not, doesn't matter if we're formally still in NATO. The effect is the same, that the Europeans have reason to doubt it, and Putin potentially has reason to challenge it.
What would be your message to European leaders, heads of state now, who are calling Trump an ally, but clearly desperately worried that he's not? I mean, would you be relying on him?
Well, the Reagan thing, trust but verify. I mean, I don't begrudge European leaders for continuing to try. Like Keir Starmer, for example, is taking measures to strengthen European defense, thinking about what to do for Ukraine if the United States is not there, while also keeping in touch with Washington, trying to keep it on board. I don't think that's wrong. They should, of course, try, and there's a chance. And I sympathize with the effort to do so, because without the United States, Europeans just don't have the resources to protect themselves. It's going to take a lot of time and money before they can. So I think it's smart to try. There's no need to overdo it in confronting Trump or declaring the end of the alliance. But the verify part has to go along too. As I said to John, it wouldn't be shocking at all if the United States either left NATO entirely or just gutted it by implying it wouldn't support Europe. And therefore, European leaders are right to start thinking about what do we do with it without the United States. You cannot watch what has gone on over the past weeks and more without reaching the conclusion that Europe might be on its own when it comes to European security or defense of Ukraine.
Has Europe failed to take this seriously enough until now? I remember on a tennis court at the British Embassy, a certain Phil Gordon warning the then ambassador that if David Cameron were to cut defence spending to under 2%, Barack Obama would be particularly unimpressed by that.
So for decades, John, American leaders have been pressing the Europeans, spend more, do more. It's hard to sustain our commitment to Europe if you don't. But that was never really credible, because they knew in the end it was in our interest to be there, and we would. I mean, virtually all outgoing U.S. secretaries of defense give the farewell speech in Brussels, in which they say, Bob Gates did this. Look, you guys got to take this seriously. You got to do more. And they were never scared enough to do so. And by scared, I mean, the only thing I think that would get Europeans to really take this seriously may be happening now. A Russia that's a genuine threat, and not just with an all-out invasion, but, asymmetrical attacks and the package bombs and the cyber attacks and the energy leverage, and obviously the invasion of Ukraine, combined with real doubt about whether Europeans can count on the United States. It has always been the case that it would kind of take both of those things to genuinely get the Europeans to the point that they're willing to spend the necessary money. And I think that's happening now. And just, I've been impressed actually by the way the Europeans have handled this and responded. They could have, typically either stayed silent or gone along with Trump out of fear or divided among themselves. But I've been impressed with the degree to which they've stepped up. They're not pulling the plug on Ukraine. The response to the U.S. U-turn, which has been stunning, essentially, almost switching sides in the war, Europeans haven't gone along with that. They said no. Von der Leyen went to Kyiv and made a very strong statement about how we're going to stand up. The Germans, new government comes in, they're talking about massive increases in defense spending. British government, increase defense spending, work with the French on a ceasefire, support for Ukraine. I've actually been impressed with the degree, while not trying to break with the United States. They still want to keep, they know they need the US if they can get it, but they're not just rolling over in the face of Trump. And I think that's the smart response.
Yeah. Phil, can I take you right back to the beginning and the speech last night? Because one of the most uncomfortable spectacles, I guess, in some way, was watching the Democrats and how stuck they were in choosing the right response. We saw Al Green, who was the protester who got thrown out, made all the right noises about Trump not having a mandate to cut Medicaid. But then we saw others who kind of like, oh, we're wearing different coloured hats. And, you're stuck with this question. If you think he's an autocrat or a fascist or whatever, if you think he's undoing the whole world order now, is your best offering, I've got a different coloured hat? I don't know.
No, obviously, Emily, it's weak, but I also sympathize. I don't know either, and I don't think they know. Yeah. It's not a great situation to be in, like boycotting entirely. I have some sympathy with that because it's a way of saying this is just not our normal. Let's be clear here. We're not normal. This is not the normal partisan disagreements in Washington. This guy is different, and he's challenging the Constitution, and he's doing some un-American things up there, and we need to really highlight that and raise the alarm for the American.
But he's also saying things like, you have the chance to support me when I'm cutting taxes. Everyone wants to see taxes cut. This is a popular thing. Yeah. And you could sort of feel the Democrats in the room kind of going, well, yeah, we don't want to be the high horse people. We don't want to be the unpopular ones the whole time. I mean, that's tough.
It is tough. And I do think we have to be careful not to. We fell in this trap last time with Trump, is whatever he was for, we became massively against, to the point that I think it hurt us. And it looked like we were for completely open immigration, and that we were against the police, and that we didn't care about cutting budget spending or deficits, or didn't support U.S. energy production, because we were so appalled by him that as a party, we mostly moved, what you can call it, to the left, but it was to the anti-Trump away. And that, I think, alienated a lot of voters, and that was a mistake. And it trapped us. Even, John referred to Vice President Harris and running for president. She had positions that she had taken in 2019, when if you were in a Democratic primary, that's where you needed to be. And I think as a party, we got too far. And so, running for president in 2024, the party was seen as too open to immigration and on some of the cultural stuff. And I think this time the lesson needs to be, so, just for example, all this cutting government spending, what Musk is doing is crazy and dangerous, but we shouldn't get in a place as a party where it looks like we don't sympathize. Americans like that, cutting wasteful government spending. And so we need to associate ourselves with some things that people care about, migration, inflation, cultural issues.
So nobody's going to be speaking up for transgender mice.
That's even on that one, we pay a price. That's not, I think, the issue that most Americans care about. But Trump very effectively uses that to imply that that's what the Democratic Party stands for.
Yeah. During the campaign, did you think that Kamala Harris was going to win, or did you always have this nagging doubt that the tide was against you?
Look, there were obviously structural challenges. I mean, every incumbent in the world was suffering, so we weren't naive about that. Inflation is a really serious issue. It's hard to run for president when people are really mad about that. I think that was the biggest issue of all. For me, it was like in order: inflation, migration, and cultural issues that were the tide we were swimming against. Inflation more than anything. And I actually think on that one, we had a good argument. Inflation was mostly caused by supply chain issues. Trump mismanages COVID. Supply chain issues get all messed up, creates inflation all around the world. And we did a pretty darn good job of handling it and bringing it down. It was lower in the United States than it was anywhere else in the world. And yet, for average people out there, every day being reminded that stuff cost a lot more than it used to was just a challenge that we couldn't overcome.
Was there any way she could have won?
I think these structural challenges were too great. I mean, I think most people acknowledge she ran a good campaign. Maybe she could have found a way to distance herself even more from Joe Biden, who by then was unpopular. I think I said inflation was a key issue. She tried to underscore that was going to be her main priority. I think on that one, we could have tried to make the case more that we were handling it right and Trump mishandled it. I think on migration, she could have gone further to distance herself from what we as a party did for the first 3 years, because the actions we took in 2024 were effective. But those are things on the margin. The truth is, as I said, they were powerful structural factors, anti-incumbency inflation, that made it really tough.
Sure. And we talked a moment ago, Emily asked you about the sort of protest in kind of Congress last night and how, I don't know, sort of petty it seemed. I mean, where are the big beasts, given how momentous the changes are that are taking place in America and to the international order that we've understood since the end of the Second World War? Where are the Barack Obamas and the Bill Clintons and even the George W. Bushes, let alone the Joe Bidens and the Kamala Harrises, calling this stuff out?
I just, give us some time, John. Election was a couple of months ago. Trump took office, 6 weeks ago. Honestly, I don't think people want to really hear too much from the opposition right now. The focus is on Trump and what he is doing. It is already starting to, I think, cost him some support as the results of his policies have an impact on people. Polls already show that these policies are unpopular. There are some strong Democratic voices out there you're hearing from, and Senator Slotkin last night, Alyssa Slotkin, was exactly where I think our party should be. A sane, strong, young Democrat from Michigan, who has served, presidents of both parties, who's honest and calm and smart, and on the issues that people care about, going back to issues, can stand for cutting government spending, or at least making sure it's done rationally, a solid migration policy, but without all the Trump crazy. So I think, I wouldn't worry too much that there's not an obvious leader of the Democratic Party now, but I think over time you're going to see more voices with better arguments as the consequences of Trump's policies start to hit.
And just a final question, Phil, and a personal question. I mean, you have seen up close the brutality of electoral politics that, had the result in November been different, you'd now be Secretary of State. And America would be in a very different place now. Does that haunt you, or do you just accept that's part and parcel of doing business?
Look, you have to accept and move on. You can agonize over it and reflect and ruminate all you want. Yes. Is it brutal? Yes. It's so binary. I mean, there are very few things in life that are like that, right? Happens absolutely suddenly. It's completely binary. In almost any other field, like if path A doesn't work out, there's, A- or something similar. But in this one, you're either running the government or you're not. And in this one, it's also not even as if the alternative is something, you can live with, so there's the personal consequence on top of the global and national consequence. And even more, it's kind of out of your hands. So all of that comes at once. So I'd be lying if I said somehow, no, not a big deal. It's a huge deal. But at the same time, the choices are to accept it and decide what to do next, or just give up. And that's what, you heard that from Melissa Slotkin last night. Stay engaged, don't give up. Is it terrible and tragic and sudden and shocking and binary? Yes. But if the choice is to roll over, accept it and say, all right, well, our democracy went away and nothing we can do about it, or to stay and fight, I think the latter is the answer. And you'll see that. These guys are going to screw up. They have bad policies. They won a narrow election based on a whole bunch of structural factors, some of which we just talked about. And over time, it'll become clear to Americans that this is the wrong path, and that'll give us a chance to put things on the right path again.
Dr. Philip Gordon, fantastic to hear from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
About 10 days ago, you'll remember that we got wind of a change at the top of the US administration towards Andrew Tate, poor, vulnerable, human trafficking Andrew Tate, who was stuck in Romania but was going shortly to be released to America if the Trump administration got its way. And the only person who seemed to kick up a fuss about this at the time was Ron DeSantis, who said, I'm not sure I want Andrew Tate coming to Florida. Well, today there's been a twist in this story because the Florida Attorney General has just announced an active criminal investigation into Andrew and his brother, Tristan Tate.
Yeah, look, these guys have themselves publicly admitted to participating in what very much appears to be soliciting, trafficking, preying upon women around the world. Many of these victims coming forward, some of them minors, people can spin or defend however they want. But in Florida, this type of behavior is viewed as atrocious. We're not going to accept it. They chose to come here and set their feet down in this state, and we're going to pursue every tool we have within our legal authority to hold them accountable. So we are in the process today. We have secured and executed subpoenas and warrants, and we're going to continue to move forward with full force of law. This is an ongoing criminal investigation.
So not quite as clear-cut for the Tates as it appeared when they were on that flight to freedom with their US passports returned to them. But Andrew Tate knows how to play it the MAGA way. And the MAGA way is you go on TV, ideally on Fox, all guns blazing. This was him with Candace Owens.
Truly not a hardhead like people think. If Ron would have called me privately and said, please just go to another state, you know what I would have said? No problem. I would have just left. I'm not a hard guy to deal with. If I'm really not welcome, I won't stay. I don't want to overstay a welcome. But you want to play these games? I'm right here in Miami. Come get me, arrest me, perp walk me, put me on the news, tell everyone I'm a human trafficker. You think I'm not versed? You think I'm not ready? I'm a Navy SEAL in this shit. Fucking come get me, raid my house, take my stuff. You think I sleep with a phone full of evidence? You think I don't wipe my phone every night? You think I'm dumb? Come get me, arrest me. Let's do this all over again. I've done it for 4 years in Romania. You think I'm scared of your state jail after an Eastern European gulag?
And so, dear reader, they did.
I mean, astonishing, really, that, you might just think that if you were in a bit of legal jeopardy, probably best to keep your head down, do everything through your attorney, make conciliatory statements. No, not the Tate brothers.
Well, not the MAGA way.
Not the MAGA way.
They've learnt from the top.
We will be back next week. See you then. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.
The Newsagents USA.